Hello, students. I welcome you all back to today's module. Today, our topic is freedom. Freedom. Our lesson objective is 1. Define freedom, identify the types of freedom, and narrate the Israelites in Egypt. Freedom means liberty, independence, or self-determination. We have types of freedom: economic freedom, political freedom, and social freedom. Economic freedom is a situation whereby a nation is free from poverty or starvation. Political freedom is when a nation is free from an external rule. And social freedom is where we are free from social problems. Now, I have the video here. I want to
The
sit
people
and
of
enjoy.
Israel established itself in Egypt, and the descendants of Jacob and Joseph multiplied. For a long time, the Egyptians showed their gratitude to Joseph for saving Egypt from a major cataclysm. And because of that, his people were treated with respect. But many years after the death of Joseph, the Hebrews' life in Egypt started to change. God made Abraham's descendants fertile. Therefore, the Hebrew population in Egypt grew rapidly. The Israelites were now numerous, more powerful and influential. When a new Pharaoh sat on the throne, someone who knew nothing about Joseph and Egypt's debt of gratitude to the people of Israel, the life of the Hebrews changed abruptly. The Pharaoh feared the Hebrews' growing power, a population that multiplied and thrived. He considered that the Israelites had to be contained, otherwise Egypt would fall. The ruler decreed that the Israelites had to endure forced labor. Nevertheless, they continued to multiply. The Pharaoh subjected God's chosen people to slavery, and their lives embittered, and, under the Egyptian rule, they were forced to conduct the most strenuous and degrading tasks. Nonetheless, albeit subjected to the harsh slave life, the people of Israel continued to multiply, just as God promised Abraham. The Egyptian ruler forced the midwives of the Israelites to murder the Hebrew offspring as soon as they were born. They refused to obey such an order, which threatened the very existence of their people. And when the authorities questioned them about their refusal, noticing that their children continued to be born, they stated that Israeli women were blessed with so much strength that they had given birth before their arrival. Enraged, the Pharaoh decreed that all newborn boys would have to be thrown into the Nile, and only the girls deserved to be saved. The terror grew among the Hebrews, and mothers saw their children being snatched from their arms. A woman of the tribe of Levi attempted to hide her son, and for 3 months, the child managed to dodge the Pharaoh's wrath. But as he grew older, it became more difficult to hide him. Desperate to save her son's life, she laid the baby in a seagrass blanket and let it sail the Nile. His mother prayed to God, asking for his mercy to save her child's fate. As the basket with the baby floated on the Nile, his sister chased it, following along the bank. The God's will then guided the basket towards the riverbanks, precisely where the Pharaoh's daughter was bathing herself. Spotting the basket between the reeds, the Egyptian princess ordered her maiden to pick it up. The Pharaoh's daughter was stunned when she discovered that there was a beautiful baby in it. All the evidence pointed out that such a child could only be a Hebrew offspring. Nevertheless, she decided to adopt the child and called him Moses, since he had been saved from the waters. The child would then grow up among the highest Egyptian nobility, not knowing that an even more glorious fate awaited him. Moses had been rescued from the Nile by the princess, daughter of the Egyptian pharaoh. She adopted him, and Moses grew among the highest Egyptian nobility. The princess needed a nurse for the baby, and in order to feed Moses, an Israeli slave was brought, who was in fact his biological mother. Among the Egyptian princes, he had a life of luxury and privilege, and, already an adult, he wanted to see in person how the Hebrews, his ancestry, were treated. The prince felt nothing short of horrified after witnessing the conditions under which his brothers were living. Seeing an Egyptian overseer brutally beating an Israeli slave, wrath took hold of Moses' will, and he attacked the Egyptian. The latter eventually died. The news that Moses had committed a dreadful crime spread quickly, and the Pharaoh ordered Moses to be arrested. Having no other alternative, Moses went into exile. Living now like a vagabond, Moses encountered a group of young women who were trying to hydrate their flock, but a group of shepherds was stopping the girls from reaching the well. Moses intervened on behalf of the girls, allowing them to give water to their animals. The girls thanked the Egyptian and introduced him to their father. Reuel, the girls' father, invited Moses to live with them and offered him one of his daughters in marriage. And the former Egyptian prince settled in the Median lands. He and his wife Zipporah gave birth to Gershom, and together they lived in peace in his new home. But meanwhile, the people of Israel suffered under Egyptian rule. Time passed, and a new pharaoh sat now on the throne. His government was even tougher on the Hebrews, and the chosen people asked for the Creator's help. God didn't ignore Abraham's descendants, as he would never forget the pact made with the Israelites. Moses was guiding his flock, grazing on the Mount Horeb, the mountain of God, when he saw a bush spontaneously bursting into flames. Intrigued by it, Moses walked to the bush and realized that despite the fire, the plant was not burned by fire and flames. And Moses heard the Lord's call. God said, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." God declared that he had come down to answer the cry of the chosen people, and Moses would be God's instrument to free Abraham's people from the Egyptians. Moses wasn't convinced. He was just a simple man, and he couldn't imagine his voice being heard. God asked Moses to drop his rod, and when his rod touched the ground, much to Moses' astonishment, it became a serpent. The Creator ordered Moses to grab the serpent by the tail, and with that, it became a rod again. That miracle alone would be enough to show the Israelites that God was by Moses' side, and that he was there to help them in their liberation. God taught other mechanisms to convince Abraham's people that Moses told the truth. Nevertheless, Moses still asked for someone else to be chosen, saying he lacked oratorical abilities. But God reassured him he would always be by his side, telling him what to say. God led Aaron to his brother Moses. He would be Moses' spokesman. The two brothers returned to Egypt to free God's chosen people. Moses was chosen by God to free the Israelites, then enslaved in Egypt. He returned to Egypt after his long exile in Midian. At his side was his brother Aaron, renowned among the Hebrews. The leaders of the Israelites gathered to listen to what the ancient prince of Egypt had to say. Aaron and Moses explained God's plan to free his chosen people, and in order to convince them, Moses showed the miraculous signs that God had taught him. Witnessing such a miracle, the Hebrews believed that such a man could only be God's envoy. But the Pharaoh would not be so easily convinced. Moses and Aaron were received by the Pharaoh and revealed God's will to him. Moses then said, "Let my people go." But the Pharaoh was not willing to release the Israelites. Moses warned him that if God's will was not fulfilled, Egypt would be subjected to all sorts of plagues. But such a threat only embittered the heart of the Egyptian sovereign. Retaliating, the Pharaoh made the lives of the Hebrews even more difficult. The sovereign ordered the straw used by the slaves to make bricks to be removed, but the daily production quota remained unchanged, and therefore the work of the Israelites became even more painful. Moses was dismayed to see that his people now suffered even more than before his arrival. God commanded Moses to return to the Pharaoh once more, showing him the signs that he was God's representative. Standing before the Pharaoh, Aaron threw Moses' rod to the ground, which became a serpent. But the Pharaoh's priests, using their occult efforts, replicated the action, throwing two rods that also became snakes. Nevertheless, Moses' serpent devoured the other two snakes. Yet again, Moses and Aaron failed to convince Pharaoh to free God's people. The Creator knew that the Pharaoh would not voluntarily free the Hebrew people, and therefore, the sovereign and his people would feel the strength of God's hand. To bend the Pharaoh's will, different calamities plagued the kingdom. These events became known as the 10 Plagues of Egypt.